Cedar Falls, Texas, a quiet town forgotten by most maps where the wind smells of dry grass and old stories. At the edge of town lay the Oakridge Veterans Memorial Cemetery, 27 acres of white crosses, silent as soldiers standing their final watch. Every morning Frank Doyle was there before sunrise, 70 years old, shoulders still squared like he never left the service, his gray beard, trimmed boots polished, and a faded army cap that once was olive green. He carried a small rake and a steel thermos. The first belonged to his duty, the second to his habit. He moved between the rows of graves like a man walking among brothers. He whispered names as he read them: Sergeant Allen Brooks, Latora Morris Kane, CPL, Donald Reese. He remembered their faces, their laughter before the ambush, the way the jungle swallowed their voices. 50 years gone, and still the guilt never left him. Frank lived alone in a small cabin behind the cemetery fence. His only companion was Scout, a German shepherd with intelligent eyes and a coat like silver smoke. The townspeople said the dog understood English better than most men in Cedar Falls. Every afternoon Frank threw sticks toward the trees, and Scout always brought them back, never tired, never distracted, loyal to the bone. He didn't talk much. The folks at the diner knew him as the old vet who keeps the graves clean. Children waved when he passed by. The sheriff's deputies respected him. To most, Frank was harmless. To himself, he was serving a final mission to guard the peace of those who couldn't. It began on a Thursday. A dust storm had blown through the valley that morning, leaving the cemetery scattered with dry leaves. Frank was clearing them when he heard the engine's deep rolling sounds like thunder without rain. He looked up and saw them, a line of motorcycles, black and chrome, roaring down County Road 14. They stopped near the far fence where the ground sloped toward the old maintenance road. About a dozen men, rough and loud, with leather vests and patches, reading Iron Vulture's MC. They parked close, too close to the Veterans Park line. Frank watched from a distance, resting his hands on the rake. He'd seen that type before, not the kind of men who respected much. By noon, they were unloading crates, pitching a few tents, and cracking open beer cans. The air filled with the sound of engines and country metal. Frank walked over, slow but steady, Scout padding beside him. The tallest one, a man with a gray ponytail and arms full of tattoos, turned toward him. He smiled, not kindly. "Well, look what the wind dragged in. What's up, Grandpa?" "This land here," Frank said, "evenly belongs to the town and the fallen, not for camping." The biker chuckled. "Relax, old-timer. We ain't hurting nobody." He reached into his vest and pulled out a wad of cash. "Here, take this. Go get yourself a beer. Forget we're even here." Frank didn't even look at the money. His voice came calm, iron steady. "I don't drink on duty. And this ground doesn't forget." The biker's grin faded. He glanced at his men, then back at Frank. "Duty? What are you, the cemetery police?" "Something like that," Frank said. "Name's Doyle. Sergeant First Class, retired. I buried some of these men myself." He took a step forward. "So no, I won't forget." A few bikers laughed under their breath. The tall one shrugged. "Suit yourself, Doyle. But don't say we didn't offer friendly terms." Frank nodded, once turned his back and walked away with Scout trotting beside him. He didn't look back, but his jaw tightened the way it used to before a firefight. That evening, the sky over Cedar Falls turned the color of burnt copper. Frank stood on his porch watching headlights flicker down by the old maintenance road. The bikers were still there, voices, loud music echoing through the oaks. He called the Cedar Falls Police Department. The line clicked and a lazy voice answered. "Sheriff's Office, Wells speaking." "Chief Wells, this is Frank Doyle," he said. "Got a bunch of bikers camping behind the Veterans Park. They're tearing up the property. I think they're up to something." There was a pause. "You saying they're doing drugs or something, Frank?" "I'm saying they're trespassing on sacred ground." Wells sighed. "I'll send a deputy to take a look tomorrow. For now, try not to stir trouble, okay? They'll be gone in a few days." Frank frowned. "You don't understand, Chief. The line went dead. He stared at the phone for a moment, then hung it up slowly. Scout nudged his leg as if sensing his frustration. "Yeah," Frank muttered. "I guess it's just us again." He loaded his old Remington 870 shotgun, not out of fear, but habit. Then he sat by the window, the dog at his feet, watching the faint orange glow of a campfire through the trees. The next morning, the bikers were still there. They'd parked their motorcycles closer to the fence now. Beer cans and trash littered the grass near the graves. Frank clenched his fists, took a deep breath, and began raking again. Duty didn't stop because of punks. By noon, he'd filled 6 bags of trash. He tied each one, neatly lined them by the fence, and whispered the same line to each row of crosses. "They didn't clean up after war, so I'll clean up after peace." That afternoon, a boy from town came by on a bike. "Mr. Doyle," he said, "my dad says those bikers are bad news. Maybe you should stay inside." Frank smiled gently. "Son, sometimes bad news needs a good witness." When the boy rode away, Frank looked out over the cemetery again. Wind rustled the flags beside each headstone, the kind of small salute only the living can see. He whispered, "Don't worry, boys. No one's taking this ground without a fight." That night, thunder rolled somewhere beyond the horizon. Frank sat in the dark, flipping open an old wooden box inside Medal's dog tags and a faded photograph of 4 young soldiers grinning in the rain. The caption on the back read, "Delta Recon, 1970 Brothers, till the end." Scout lifted his head, ears twitching. Outside engines rumbled again, louder this time. Frank reached over, patting the dog's back. "It's all right, buddy. Let's just keep watch." He turned off the light. The moonlight spilled across the floorboards, cutting through the cabin window like a thin blade. Out there, in the far dark of the park, the first sparks of a new war were already flickering. The Texas sun rose hot and unforgiving the next morning. The light spilled across Oakridge Cemetery, catching on white marble and brass nameplates. Frank Doyle was already up, sleeves rolled, pushing his old mower through the narrow lanes between headstones. Scout followed, keeping rhythm with the hum of the engine. The sound of motorcycles shattered the quiet. Frank turned off the mower, jaw tightening. Down by the service road, the iron vultures had returned, twice as many as before. They weren't just camping now. They were building something. Wooden pallets, stacked fuel drums lined up a canopy strung with cheap lights. Frank took a slow breath. He'd fought in jungles noisier than this, but the noise here felt worse because it came from men who'd never earned the right to make it. He walked down the hill toward them, Scout trotting by his side. Dust rose under his boots. The tall biker with the gray ponytail, Ray Sutter, was barking orders. A younger one sprayed graffiti on a concrete wall, a crude skull with wings right next to the veteran's gate. Frank's voice cut through the roar of an idling engine. "Stop that!" The boy turned, sneered. "Old man, this ain't your property." "It's government property," Frank said, "which makes it mine more than yours." Ray stepped forward, his shadow long across the gravel. "We told you to stay out of our way, Sergeant. Don't make this personal." Frank's gaze didn't waver. When you step on soldiers' graves, it gets personal real fast. For a long moment, nobody spoke. The air buzzed with engines and anger. Finally, Ray smirked. "You think anyone in this town cares? Sheriff Wells already gave us the green light. You're the only one crying over bones." Frank froze. "The sheriff?" Ray spread his hands. "Let's just say he appreciates donations. Now, unless you want trouble, go back to your little shack." Frank turned away before the fury could boil over. He'd learned long ago that timing wins wars, not temper. He walked home in silence, Scout padding close, hackles raised. That afternoon, Frank drove his old Chevy pickup to the Cedar Falls police station. The place looked tired, one floor a faded flag and a porch where the sheriff sat smoking. "Morning, Chief Wells," Frank said, stepping up to the desk. "We need to talk." Wells looked up, squinting. "About what?" "Those bikers. They're defacing the cemetery, camping on federal ground and claiming you're protecting them. Wells snorted. They're exaggerating. They've got permits to hold a gathering on the old service land. That land borders the veterans section. They're desecrating graves. Wells leaned back. You got proof of that? Frank took out his phone, thumbed through photos, trash piles, tire marks across graves, the graffiti. Wells glanced at them, then handed the phone back like it burned. Not enough, he said. Could be anyone. Frank's eyes narrowed. You're letting them destroy a memorial. You swore an oath, Chief. Wells's tone hardened. And I'm telling you to stand down. You're retired. Let the law handle it. Frank leaned in, voice low. Seems to me the law's been bought. Wells's hand drifted near his holster. Watch yourself, Doyle. Frank turned and walked out, feeling Scout tug on the leash. The door slammed behind him, echoing down Main Street. 2 days later, the bikers pushed further into the cemetery. They cut through the service gate with bolt cutters, their engines growling over the open field. Music blasted from portable speakers. They laughed, drank, and used the stone walls as a backdrop for target practice. Frank arrived mid-afternoon and froze. They'd driven over the grave of Sergeant Alan Brooks, his closest friend from the war. The marble cross was broken tire marks cutting across the name. Frank's voice trembled when he spoke. That man died in my arms, and you just ran over his grave. A biker spat on the ground. Should have picked a better parking spot. Ray laughed, tossing a beer can aside. You really think anyone's gonna care about a dead man and his babysitter? Frank's fist clenched, veins standing out like cables. Scout growled, low teeth bared. Call off the dog, old man, Ray said, smirking, before he gets hurt. Frank took a step forward. Leave, now, or you'll wish you did. The laughter died for a second. Something in his voice cut through the noise. The kind of voice only soldiers had when they'd seen death up close. Then Ray waved him off. You don't scare me, Hammer. Frank blinked. What did you call me? Ray smirked. We did our homework. Sergeant First Class Frank Hammer Doyle, 5th Special Forces Group, Vietnam, Panama, Somalia. You were quite the killer. Frank's jaw set. I buried that part of me. Maybe you should have buried yourself with it, Ray said. Frank turned his back and walked away, each step heavy but controlled. Scout followed, still snarling softly. That night, the storm finally broke. Rain hammered the tin roof of the cabin as Frank sat by the window watching lightning flash across the hills. Scout lay beside him, head on his paws. On the table lay his old army notebook. Inside, hand-drawn maps of the cemetery grounds, trenches, utility tunnels, elevation marks. He'd memorized it years ago for maintenance work. Now he studied it with a soldier's precision. He whispered to himself, if the law won't defend them, I will. He made notes. Cameras near the back gate. Motion sensors by the south fence. Contact a friend from Dallas, VA about surveillance equipment. The storm raged, but his thoughts were calm, methodical. When morning came, he returned to the cemetery to fix the broken headstones. He carried concrete patch and a small brush. One by one, he cleaned the dirt from the marble. When he reached Sergeant Allen's grave, he knelt longer than usual. I'm sorry, brother, he murmured. They crossed the line, and I let them. He pressed his palm to the cool stone. Won't happen again. That evening, a young reporter named Clara Mendoza stopped by, camera in hand. Mr. Doyle, folks say there's trouble out here. Frank looked at her, weary but resolute. Trouble's just another word for unfinished business. Can I film the damage, she asked. He hesitated, then nodded. Film the truth, that's all I ever wanted. She recorded quietly as he replaced flags and cleaned graves. The footage would later air on local news, but for now it only made Wells angrier. That night, the bikers' campfire burned brighter than before, defiant red against the dark. Frank watched from his porch, Scout by his side. He could smell the gasoline on the wind. They think this ground belongs to them, he muttered. They forgot who it really belongs to. He lifted his gaze toward the endless rows of headstones glinting under the moon. Every one of them seemed to be watching. The air that night was unnaturally still. No crickets, no wind, only the low growl of engines echoing across the hills of Cedar Falls. Frank Doyle sat by his cabin window, a mug of black coffee untouched beside him. Scout's ears twitched. The dog's instincts were sharper than radar. Frank checked the clock. 11:47 p.m. Too late for decent men to be moving. He stood pulled on his field jacket and grabbed the flashlight that hung by the door. Scout followed tail stiff eyes fixed toward the back gate of the Oakridge Cemetery. From afar came laughter, metallic clanks, and the faint bass of outlaw music. Frank's boots sank into the damp grass as he approached the fence. His flashlight beam caught fresh tracks, motorcycle tires cutting through the mud, a lock hanging open chain snapped clean. He muttered, "They finally did it." Through the trees, he saw the bikers spread out across the memorial field. Their headlights cut long scars of light over marble crosses. Beer cans littered the ground. A few of them were unloading crates from the back of a pickup, black bags, metallic cases. Not camping, not partying, trafficking. Frank stepped out from the shadows. That's enough. Heads turned. One biker laughed, another spat. Ray Sutter was standing on top of a flatbed cigarette glowing under his beard. Well, Ray said, "the ghost shows up again." Frank's voice carried steady and sharp. "You're trespassing on federal property. Leave. Now." Ray flicked the cigarette away. "Or what, you gonna arrest us, soldier boy?" "I've already called it in." It was a bluff. No one had answered the sheriff's line for hours. Ray's smile died. He signaled to two men. "Search him." They advanced, heavy boots crushing flowers and flags. Scout barked sharp and loud. One man raised a chain to scare him off. Frank stepped between them. "Touch him, and you'll regret it." The man laughed and swung. The chain caught Frank's shoulder, pain flaring down his arm. He staggered, but his eyes stayed cold. "You're desecrating graves, you son of..." Before he could finish, a fist slammed into his ribs. Another chain whistled through the air and struck his back. He dropped to one knee. Scout lunged. The dog's teeth sank into a biker's arm. The man screamed, falling backward. Then came the shot. One deafening crack. Scout yelped, collapsed on the grass. Frank froze. Time seemed to stop. The echo of the gunshot hung like smoke. Scout twitched once, then lay still. Ray lowered the pistol, eyes burning with cruel amusement. "Should have kept your mutt on a leash." Frank's breath came ragged. He stared at the lifeless body of the dog that had followed him through every storm, every lonely year. "You didn't have to do that," he said quietly. Ray shrugged. "This is our territory now. You don't belong here. Remember that." They turned, engines rumbling to life. The gang rode off into the night, their taillights vanishing down the dirt road like red scars across the dark. Frank stayed on his knees beside Scout, the rain beginning to fall in thin silver lines. He didn't move for a long time. The world had gone completely still again. By dawn, the rain had stopped. The sky was gray, the air thick with the smell of wet soil and motor oil. Frank dug a small grave beneath the oak tree where Scout used to sleep. He wrapped the dog in an old army blanket, the one that had survived 3 tours of duty. When the hole was filled, he pressed a flat stone into the earth and carved a single word with his knife: loyalty. He stood for a moment, head bowed. "You kept your post till the end, buddy." Then he walked back to the cabin, opened the door, and went straight to the floorboards behind the tool bench. Beneath them lay a steel hatch sealed with a padlock, the kind of lock you buy when you don't plan to open it again. He hesitated, then whispered, "You said you'd never need it again, Frank." But the silence that followed wasn't peaceful anymore. He broke the lock. The hinges groaned as he lifted the hatch. Dust rose like ghosts. Inside the bunker lay the relics of a soldier's past, a duffel bag marked U.S. Army, 2 crates of rations, boxes of ammunition, and wrapped canvas bundles. He unrolled one, his old M4A1 carbine cleaned and oiled. Next to it, a combat knife engraved with his unit's crest, 5th Special Forces Group. He ran a finger over the worn steel. The memories hit like shrapnel jungles fire, the sound of brothers shouting over gunfire. Then he found a wooden case marked "Com Gear." Inside were night vision goggles, an old encrypted radio, and a map of the area with hand-drawn coordinates. He had built the bunker decades ago. After leaving the service, part of him had never stopped being ready. Frank sat down, breathing deeply. He wasn't angry anymore, just focused. This isn't revenge, he told himself, it's duty. By evening, he was back in the cemetery, moving carefully among the headstones. He placed small motion sensors near the south fence, a camera disguised as a birdhouse near the gate, another high in the oak tree. He checked the feed on a tablet. All clear. From the road, he saw headlights again, 2 cars this time, not bikes. Heavy SUVs, tinted windows. Ray and his men were unloading more crates, meeting someone dressed too clean for their kind. Frank zoomed in the lens. The man's face was sharp, angular. Lance Viper Carson, ex-con cartel middleman. He'd seen the mugshot years ago in a VA newsletter about local crime. Frank recorded everything. One of the bikers noticed movement near the trees and shouted. A flashlight beam swept across the gravestones. Frank ducked behind a monument, heart steady, breath controlled. He moved low and fast, disappearing behind the maintenance shed. The skills hadn't left him. They never do. After a few tense minutes, the engine started again. The SUVs rolled out. The bikers followed. Frank returned to his cabin, uploaded the footage, and drafted an anonymous message. To DEA Headquarters, Dallas Field Office. Subject: narcotics and arms trafficking. Oakridge Veterans Memorial Grounds. Attachment video, evidence location map, timestamp logs. Note: you'll want to come prepared. He hit send, then closed the laptop, exhaled, and looked toward the oak tree outside the one now guarding Scout's grave. Midnight came again, colder this time. Frank stood on his porch, shotgun across his knees. Lightning flickered beyond the hills. He could feel the coming storm, not just weather, but something larger, heavier. He whispered toward the rows of white stones. You served your time. Now it's my turn again. Thunder rolled, distant but certain. And somewhere down the road, the sound of engines rose once more, carried by the wind like a warning. Frank reached for the radio, turned the dial to a familiar static frequency, and spoke softly into the mic. Delta 1 reporting. Mission begins at dawn. By Friday night, the storm clouds had gathered over Cedar Falls, low and heavy like a war drum. Frank Doyle knew the timing was perfect. He'd spent 4 nights preparing, digging, wiring, calculating angles. Every inch of Oakridge Cemetery had become a chessboard. Cameras watched every path. Motion sensors blinked red behind flower vases. 2 pressure triggers waited near the north gate, linked to small explosive charges buried deep enough to disable tires, but not kill. He wasn't here for vengeance. He was here for proof and for justice the right way. Frank adjusted the earpiece under his cap. The faint hum of his old encrypted radio came alive. DEA field frequency. Signal confirmed. He'd sent them everything: videos, coordinates, names. He only needed to hold the line until they arrived. He looked at the grave of Sergeant Alan Brooks one last time. Watch over me, brother, he whispered. It's one more long night. Scout's grave lay nearby, the word loyalty glowing faintly under the lantern. Frank patted the stone once, then pulled his jacket tight and moved into the shadows. At exactly 11:02 p.m., the first engine roared. Then another. Through the mist, the iron vultures came thundering down the access road, 15 bikes, 2 pickup trucks, and a black SUV trailing behind. Inside the SUV sat Lance Viper Carson, ex-cartel enforcer, now dressed like a businessman with a devil's grin. Ray Sutter rode up front, chain slung over his shoulder, the same man who'd shot Scout. Frank watched from his vantage point on the maintenance roof, night vision goggles glowing green. "They're early," he muttered. "Good." He flipped a switch on a small control box. 3 floodlights near the rear gate went dark, his signal marker for the DEA's GPS. Down below, Ray barked orders. Set up quick product stays in the SUV. No lights past the gate. Frank watched them unload black duffels, guns, cash meth packages. He zoomed the lens, snapping stills every few seconds. Evidence, solid federal-grade evidence. When the last crate hit the ground, Ray lit a cigarette. "Move fast. I don't want any ghost stories tonight." Frank's voice came out of the darkness like gravel. "You should have thought of that before you killed my dog." Engines cut off, cigarettes dropped, heads whipped around. Ray squinted into the night. "Who's there?" A red flare shot into the sky, bright as fire. Every camera on Frank's rig began to record. The first explosion hit the pickup's front tires, sharp, concussive controlled. The truck pitched sideways, alarms blaring. The bikers scattered, shouting. Frank moved fast, sliding down the roof ladder, rifle in hand. He fired 2 warning shots into the air. "Drop it, federal agents are on the way." Ray roared, "He's bluffing, kill him." Gunfire cracked. Bullets tore through marble crosses. Frank ducked behind a headstone, returned 2 precise shots, 1 engine block, 1 shoulder hit. He moved like he was 30 again. Years of rust fell away in seconds. Every time a biker tried to flank a trap, answered a flashbang, a snare line, a spike strip hidden under fresh dirt. The field lit up with chaos flares, igniting engines, screaming men shouting over static. Ray grabbed a shotgun and charged forward. "You think you can stop us, old man?" Frank switched to the secondary channel on his radio. Package confirmed. "Engage on Beacon 3. Somewhere in the sky, unseen, a chopper engine responded. But on the ground, Frank was alone. He reloaded calmly, heart steady. "Not stopping you, Ray," he said under his breath. "Just buying time." Ray came over the ridge, firing blindly. Buckshot shredded the flagpole beside Frank. Frank rolled, fired back. The bullet grazed Ray's vest and sent him tumbling into a gravestone. "Stay down," Frank warned. Ray coughed, laughed. "You don't have the guts." Frank lowered the rifle slightly. "I don't need guts. I have reason." Ray swung the chain, metal glinting under lightning, and charged again. The chain wrapped around Frank's arm. The 2 men crashed into the mud, struggling fists, landing heavy. Frank gritted his teeth, slammed his elbow into Ray's throat, and broke free. Both men gasped, soaked in rain and fury. Ray spat blood. "They'll bury you here too." Frank aimed the rifle. "I'm already home." Before he could fire, headlights flashed behind them, 2 SUVs barreling through the south gate. DEA reinforcements. No, the second wave of bikers. Frank hit the detonator. The ground erupted in a line of controlled charges. The lead SUV spun out, colliding with the second. Flames burst, lighting up the sky like daylight. "Federal agents incoming," Frank shouted into the radio. Multiple suspects armed. Ray turned to run, but Frank was faster. He swung the rifle butt into Ray's chest, sending him sprawling. The chain fell from his hand. Thunder rolled again, louder this time. Then came the chopper. Searchlights cut through the smoke. The thump of rotor blades shook the ground. Voices boomed over loudspeakers. "DEA, drop your weapons. You are surrounded." Panic erupted among the bikers. Some fired into the air, others bolted for the woods. DEA trucks roared through the front gate, tactical units fanning out behind shields. Frank watched from behind the marble cross of Sergeant Allen's grave. His mission was done. He rose slowly, shoulders trembling with exhaustion. Then gunfire. A stray round hit him square in the side. He staggered, dropped to one knee. Blood darkened his shirt. Ray, half conscious, saw him fall and crawled toward the gate, trying to escape. A DEA agent tackled him face first into the mud. Frank pressed his hand against the wound, breath coming shallow. He leaned against Alan's grave, whispering, "Guess I made it back to you after all." Within minutes, the field turned into a sea of blue and red lights. Agents cuffed suspects, tagged evidence, photographed wrecked vehicles. DEA Director Martha Klein herself stepped out of the command van, scanning the chaos. "Who's the operator?" she asked. A sergeant pointed toward the hill. "There, Mom, the old man. Name's Frank Doyle. He's hit." Klein rushed over, kneeling beside him. "Sir, stay with me. We've got medics inbound." Frank tried to smile. "Took you long enough." "You did good," she said softly. "Real good." He looked past her toward Scout's grave, barely visible in the light. Rain ran down his face like tears. "Tell him," he whispered, "tell him the cemetery's safe again." Then he went still. For a heartbeat, the field was silent except for the crackle of radios and distant thunder. A DEA medic checked his pulse, then nodded once to the director. She stood, straightened her coat, and saluted. "Rest easy, soldier. Mission accomplished." As dawn broke over Cedar Falls, the smoke began to clear. 2 burned-out SUVs, a dozen wrecked bikes, crates of drugs and weapons, all captured evidence. The news would call it the Cedar Falls takedown. But the townspeople would remember it differently. They'd say it was one old soldier one last time defending the peace his brothers died for. The papers called him the Silent Hammer. Morning crept slowly over Cedar Falls, washing the battlefield in pale gold. Smoke still rose from the burned SUVs, and the scent of wet soil and gunpowder lingered. The townspeople gathered by the cemetery gates, whispering, pointing toward the rows of flashing lights. The story had already begun to spread. The old veteran stopped them, alone. Inside the perimeter, DEA agents moved methodically, collecting weapons, cataloging evidence, photographing the wreckage. The graves were scorched but still standing. The flag over the main memorial was torn, its edges blackened by fire, yet it fluttered proudly in the rising breeze. Near the oak tree, medics loaded Frank Doyle onto a stretcher. His uniform jacket was soaked with blood, but his face was peaceful, almost serene. His pulse was weak but steady. "Careful," the medic said. "He's got internal bleeding, but he's fighting." DEA Director Martha Klein walked beside the stretcher, helmet tucked under her arm. "He's earned the right to fight as long as he wants," she said quietly. The chopper lifted off, carrying Frank toward Dallas VA Medical Center. From above, the cemetery looked like 2 worlds colliding, ashes and marble smoke and sunlight. 3 days later, Frank opened his eyes to the rhythmic beep of hospital monitors. White ceiling, sterile air. His shoulder burned with every breath. "Welcome back, Sergeant Doyle." He turned his head slightly. Director Klein stood by the bed, dressed in civilian clothes, now holding a small folder. "You made national news," she said. "The footage you sent us, along with what we found, broke open a whole network. Arms meth trafficking routes through 5 states. You didn't just stop a gang, you dismantled an empire." Frank tried to smile, voice rough. "Guess I still know how to clean up a mess." Klein's tone softened. "You did what no one else could, what no one else would." She opened the folder and pulled out a sealed envelope. This came straight from Washington. Inside was a formal letter signed by the Secretary of Defense and a small medal box. The letter read, "For extraordinary valor and service in defense of American lives and national honor, Sergeant First Class Frank Doyle is hereby awarded the Distinguished Service Cross with citation of courage and sacrifice beyond the call of duty." Klein pinned the medal gently to the hospital blanket. The president himself approved it. He said, "Men like you remind this country what the word honor means." Frank stared at the medal for a long moment. His hand trembled as he touched it. "I didn't do it for medals," he murmured. "I did it for them." Klein nodded. "We know." News of the Cedar Falls takedown spread across America. Veterans groups held vigils. Churches in small towns rang their bells at dusk. Social media filled with old photos of soldiers, captions reading, "Some wars never end, thank you for finishing one of them." At Oakridge Cemetery, hundreds came to rebuild. The local high school volunteered to clean and repaint the damaged gravestones. Gardeners replanted flowers. Someone left a sign at the gate. "This ground stands because one man stood his ground." And beside the oak tree, people placed small dog collars, each tagged with one word: loyalty. Weeks later, Frank was wheeled into a ceremony at Fort Hood. Cameras flashed, soldiers lined both sides of the hall. A military band played softly. The Secretary of Defense approached the podium. "We gather today to honor a man who reminded us that service doesn't end with discharge, that duty doesn't retire, that courage can be quiet but never invisible." He turned toward Frank, who sat upright in his wheelchair, chest out, eyes clear. "Sergeant First Class Frank Doyle, the Silent Hammer, for your actions defending the sanctity of our Veterans Memorial and preserving public safety at great personal risk, the nation thanks you." Applause filled the hall, rising to a thunder that made Frank close his eyes for a moment. He wasn't hearing claps, he was hearing echoes of voices from decades ago. Alan Brooks Reese, the brothers he buried. He whispered under his breath, "We made it, boys." After the ceremony, a reporter asked him, "What kept you going out there, Sergeant?" He thought for a long second. "Simple," he said. "They were coming for the wrong ground, and I still had one fight left in me." Back in Cedar Falls, the town council voted unanimously to rename the road leading to the cemetery Hammer Road. A bronze statue was placed near the entrance, Frank standing tall in field gear, hand resting on the head of a German shepherd. Beneath it, a plaque read, "In honor of Sergeant Frank Doyle and Scout Guardians of Oakridge, they kept the peace when peace was in danger." Every Memorial Day since, people come with flowers and flags. Some pray, some simply stand in silence. Veterans salute. Children ask who the man in bronze was. Parents tell them he was the kind of man who didn't ask for thanks, but made sure others had the freedom to give it. Months passed. Frank recovered slowly, though walking remained painful. He returned to his cabin by the cemetery, where the grass had grown greener than before. The government rebuilt the maintenance shed and replaced every damaged marker. One autumn evening, he walked down to Scout's grave. The sunset painted the sky in amber light. He placed a small folded flag beside the stone and whispered, "We did good, buddy." A gentle breeze stirred, rustling through the oak leaves. Somewhere a distant bugle sounded from a military funeral on the other side of the park. The notes carried across the air, solemn and proud. Frank stood still, eyes closed, listening until the last echo faded. Then he smiled. That night, a local news anchor closed her report with these words, "In an age when headlines are full of corruption and greed, Cedar Falls remembers one man who asked for nothing and gave everything. Frank Doyle, known as the Silent Hammer, stood alone against evil and reminded us all that honor never dies." The screen cut to footage of the statue glowing under lamplight, the American flag waving behind it. In his cabin, Frank watched the broadcast in silence. Then he turned off the TV, looked out the window toward the moonlit rows of graves and whispered, "Rest easy, boys. It's quiet now." He sat back, the hum of the night wrapping around him, a soldier finally at peace. Thank you for watching The Silent Hammer, the Quiet Veteran. This story isn't just about one old soldier. It's a reminder that honor and loyalty never grow old. No matter how much time passes, there are still people who stand for what's right, not for glory, but for justice, brotherhood, and peace. If this story touched your heart, please like and share it to help spread its message of courage, integrity, and the quiet strength that defines true heroes. Our channel will return soon with more stories, tales where goodness, sacrifice, and justice still have a voice. See you in the next story.